Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, MITRE ATT&CK Framework, How to Boost Your Security Backbone by Eva, Ben, and I'm Richa and I'll be your host for the day. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 10 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any questions during the webinar to any organizers or panelists, please post your query in the Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio-video challenges, please check your internet connections or you may log out and log in again. An important announcement for the certificate of attendance. Participant needs to attend the complete webinar to qualify for certificate of attendance. Participants should fill in the survey form in the attendees thank you email and answer the 3 questions based on the webinar, provided with the right answers within the same day. If these 2 criteria are met, then only the participant will get the certificate of attendance within the 5 to 7 working days after the event. About our speaker, Eva Ben is a senior security PM manager at Microsoft. She currently leads the offensive security PM team that secures Microsoft's largest and most important products and services across edge devices, Windows OS and devices, Xbox, Microsoft Game Studios, and more. Eva has experience in various cybersecurity domains and Big Four consulting. Her expertise has earned her multiple well-recognized industry certifications such as CISSP, CEH, CCSP, and Security Plus. Aside from lifelong obsession with cybersecurity, Eva is passionate about storytelling and distilling complex security problems into easy-to-understand concepts. She serves as a board of directors and an advisory board member, and also the co-founder of Women in Tech Global, an organization that helps drive gender equality, diversity, and inclusion in tech. So without any further delay, I hand over the session to you, Eva.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, Richa. So, hi everyone. I am super excited to be here today and to talk about how to adopt the threat-informed defense to cybersecurity using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So we have a lot to cover today, and I'm super excited to dive right in. So if you have any questions about my background, I'll be sharing my contact information toward the end. So the roadmap for today is, first we're going to start by defining what is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So if you don't know what it is, if you haven't heard of it, don't worry, we're going to go over that from zero. Then we're going to kind of figure out what are the different elements within the attack framework, how can we use it, how can we actually put it to practice, and then we're going to have a hands-on demo on how to use a tool called the Attack Navigator, which is a really cool tool that's offered by MITRE to help you navigate the attack framework more effectively. And then we'll make sure we have some time for questions at the end. Cool. So starting off, what is the MITRE framework? MITRE is an organization created to provide engineering and technical guidance to the federal government. And MITRE framework, the attack framework, was initially started off as a government research project back in 2013. But in 2015, it was actually made available openly to the public to use. And today, the MITRE ATT&CK framework is globally recognized knowledge base of real-world attacks reflecting the various phases of the attack kill chain. The framework helps us understand how adversaries gain access, what do they do once they gain access, and what are they trying to accomplish. And without understanding what attackers want, what are they after, it's really difficult for us to prioritize our defenses and put the right defenses in place. And that is really what the threat-informed defense is all about, knowing our threat actors and knowing how to defend against them. So the MITRE framework is constantly evolving. It's definitely a living content. It's being updated 2 to 3 times every year to ensure that it keeps up with the ever-changing security landscape, and it continues to be relevant. So the latest version of MITRE ATT&CK just came out last month in October, so very timely for this presentation. And here on this slide, you see everything that is included in it. And as you can see, there is a lot there. Many people that are new to using MITRE ATT&CK focus primarily on the first three things you see here on the slide, and that's the tactics, techniques, and the sub-techniques. But as you can see, there are some additional invaluable resources that unfortunately are often overlooked. So we'll make sure we cover all of them today, and we know what they're about and how we can use them. Now, the framework originally focused only on threat against the Windows enterprise systems. But today, it also covers a variety of different platforms, including Mac OS, Linux, mobile, industrial control systems, and various cloud-based technologies. So it's definitely evolving. Cool. All right, so let's start off with the tactics. What are tactics? Tactics represents the why adversaries try to engage in specific activities. What is the reason they're performing a specific action? For example, an adversary might go and usually perform a password spray attack, not just because they want to or because it's fun. Well, obviously they may do it because it's fun, but most commonly it's because they're looking to gain credential access. That is the specific tactic or the outcome that they are after. And that is what a tactic is, really the technical goal of an attacker. Let's take a very quick look at the 14 tactics defined by MITRE. Starting by reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is all about gathering information, usually through open source intelligence or publicly available sources. This information is then used by attackers to scope in their targets and to prioritize their objectives and their attacks later in the post-compromise activities. Resource development involves creating, purchasing, compromising, or stealing resources that can be used for further phases in the kill chain. For example, attackers may need to stand up infrastructure, create new accounts, develop or download malware or exploits, and so on. Initial access represents the initial foothold within a network. Everything past this phase is known as post-exploitation attacks. Execution is when an attacker runs malicious code on a local or remote system. For example, an adversary might use a remote access tool to run PowerShell script or something that does remote system discovery. Persistence is all about maintaining that access, keeping the access across system restarts, change credentials, or any other interruptions that may actually compromise that access and boot you off. Privilege escalation, as the name suggests, represent gaining high-level permissions or privileges to a system or network. Adversaries usually gain foothold with general user accounts, but they require elevated permissions to go follow through on their objectives. And that is what privilege escalation is all about. Defense evasion simply means attackers try to avoid being detected through our environment. And this may involve them disabling security software or encrypting malicious scripts to avoid detection and so forth. Credential access consists of technologies of stealing credentials, as the name suggests, such as account names and passwords. Discovery is when an attacker is trying to figure out our environment. They're in, but they still need to explore. They need to orient themselves, deciding how to act. For example, attackers may attempt to get a list of local system accounts and figure out what are the local account admins. The initial foothold is rarely an attacker's end goal, and attackers usually pivot laterally through our environment to get to where they need to go, and that is called lateral movement. Then we have collection, and collection involves gathering information that is relevant to an attacker's objective. Then we have command and control. Command and control represents when an attacker is communicating with the compromised system and is trying to control it. They commonly attempt to mimic normal expected traffic to avoid detection. Exfiltration is when an attacker is stealing data. Now, this is different than collection because this is when the data is actually leaving your system or network. And finally, we have impact. And this is when an attacker is trying to impact availability or impact integrity of your environment by manipulating or destroying systems or data. Cool. Okay, so now the tactics were the how. The tactics were the why. Now the techniques are the what an adversary does to achieve a particular tactic. So the techniques break down to sub-techniques and procedures. Procedures are specific methods for accomplishing the goal of a technique or a sub-technique. They commonly contain a list of tools, malware, and threat actors known to use a particular technique. Together, tactics, techniques, and procedures are known as TTPs. So if you have heard the term TTP, that is what it stands for. As mentioned earlier, currently the version 12 of the Enterprise MITRE Matrix has 193 techniques and 401 sub-techniques. So all of these are mapped to mitigations and detections to help defenders with guidance on how to protect against them. And clearly, we won't be able to cover all of them today. But for example, an attacker might use phishing as a technique that enables them to gain initial access, which is the tactic or the ultimate goal. An example of a sub-technique is web shell, which is part of server software component technique. And as per the MITRE framework, web shell is usually installed to gain persistent access or to conduct privilege escalation. And this is exactly how nation-state actors establish persistent access in the well-known attack called SolarWinds, which disrupted the security industry at large not too long ago. And hopefully this gives you a kind of a good overview of the level of depth that is offered by the attack matrix in techniques. Now we're going to move on to groups. Specific adversaries tends to use specific techniques, and the MITRE attack provides one of the most useful centralized references of threat groups you'll ever find in the public domain. Oopsie, moving a little bit too fast. Okay, back to groups. Yeah, so the adversary group catalogs both known and suspected groups, along with their histories, their habits, their observed behaviors, and so on. And we're not going to go into over all 135 groups, but for example, one well-known group is APT29, also referred to as Cozy Bear or the Dukes. And this is a threat group that has been attributed to Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. And this group was also attributed the massive SolarWinds supply chain compromise, which we just mentioned. And you get the idea. We'll look into a specific example shortly on how we can map our defenses and see how protected we are against specific groups using the MITRE attack framework. So we covered the why, we covered the what, we covered the who. The tools or the software is the how. And software is the generic term that MITRE uses for tools used by attackers to conduct behavior modeled in the attack framework. So this can include custom tools or native operating system utilities that are used for malicious purposes. Examples can include things such as Metasploit, Mimikatz, or native Windows utilities such as Netstat, TaskList, and more. And each software entry contains detailed descriptions of how the software has been used, by whom, and for what purpose. And these are usually tools that can be used not just by adversaries, but also by defenders, by red teamers, pen testers. And although the list can be super useful reference and it's very extensive, I want to make sure that you all understand it's not an exhaustive list. There are a lot of tools out there, but it is a good starting point. So in the latest attack version, MITRE introduced campaigns. And campaigns is something that's brand new to the attack framework. So if you haven't heard of it, please don't feel bad about it. It literally just came out last month. And what are campaigns? Campaigns represent groupings of intrusion activities that are conducted over a specific period of time with common targets and common objectives. Campaigns may or may not be attributed to a specific threat actors. And in this initial version, most of the campaigns listed there are 14. They're attributed to cyber espionage and ransomware campaigns. But I'm sure this is going to evolve as MITRE continues to invest in this module. And campaigns can really be useful because they're able to help us connect the dots to identify trends while monitor the introduction of new capabilities, and can also help identify continued threat actor reliance on certain techniques regardless of the campaign objective or targets. And campaigns can also help us tie the various attack matrices. Today, there is 3 matrices focusing on enterprise, on mobile, and industrial control systems. And we can further document through campaigns how adversaries pivot across these domains using a variety of techniques to accomplish their objectives. So mitigations is, as the name suggests, they are basically ways on how we can prevent techniques and sub-techniques from being executed successfully. Mitigations are essentially a critical part of strategic planning because they help us how to prioritize our defenses against real-world threat actor activity. And MITRE has 43 mitigation categories, and each has a set of critical mitigation steps needed to mitigate a specific attack technique. So for example, one of the mitigations is account use policies. Not particularly actionable. But when you drill down in this particular mitigation category, you see specific mitigation controls for brute force, password guessing, password spraying, credential stuffing, and more. And shortly we actually see hands-on how we can use mitigations to map to specific threat actors we're worried about and see where the gaps are. All right, so I wanted to actually use the opportunity here to share another brand new resource that can be used to supplement the MITRE attack matrix. Microsoft just released the Azure Threat Research Matrix, or ATRM. And it's a threat matrix based on the MITRE attack framework principle, but it's focusing on specific tactic and techniques used to compromise Azure resources and Azure Active Directory. And I want to emphasize that this is not meant to replace the MITRE attack, but just to supplement it, focusing on Azure resources and Azure AD. And I'm super proud that this was developed within my team by our offensive security research team called Raptor, hence the reptile on the slide. And I have included links on the slide, but I will also share in the chat on how you can learn more about the ATRM and how you can connect with my colleague Ryan Hasconnect, who is the ATRM author, and make sure you connect with him if you want to learn more. I've included his Twitter handle, and I'll make sure I follow through with some links in the chat later. So we learned a lot about the various types of resources available. Now let's take a look at some ways on how we can use them. How we can put these to practice. And I have shortlisted some common use cases, but I just want to caution you, this is not supposed to be an exhaustive list. It's just something to get us started on some ideas on how we can use that framework. So first and foremost, MITRE ATT&CK provides a common language for us to have conversations about real-world threats. And it can be really useful for communicating security and defense strategies to various stakeholders, not only within your organization, but also across the industry. The MITRE ATT&CK framework can also be used to measure and improve the maturity and effectiveness of our security incident response teams. It can also help our cyber threat intelligence efforts by providing real-world industry context that can help us decide what to prioritize, especially when our threat feeds are super overwhelming. The MITRE ATT&CK can also be used as a framework to develop gap analysis, enabling us to check what attack vectors apply to our organizations and what defenses do we have in place to protect against them, and as well, where are we vulnerable. And the framework can also help us perform adversary emulation assessments, which enable us to realistically kind of evaluate and emulate the operations of particular threat actor, measuring our resilience against realistic cyber threats. The MITRE framework can also be used in red teaming and pen test exercises to ensure comprehensive coverage and also to help communicate the results in a way that leaders and other stakeholders can easily understand them. Similarly, we can use the MITRE ATT&CK in this context to identify any attack vectors that may be out of scope. Threat hunters can use the MITRE to further understand the various adversaries techniques used while proactively hunting for threats. And finally, we can use the MITRE ATT&CK framework to to figure out how our mitigations and detections can be defined in the form of security requirements, right? And how we can define some technical baselines that go beyond our existing governance frameworks and just enrich our policies, standards, and security baseline programs. So as you can see, the use cases on how we can use the MITRE ATT&CK can vary vastly, from establishing common taxonomy, common language, from enabling our various security operations team to actually assisting our security governance. So the opportunities are endless. Okay, so finally, we are actually ready to learn how to put all of what we discovered today into practice and see what is the Attack Navigator tool, how can we use it. I have recorded a demo just to ensure no glitches, and so we'll watch it together and we'll see how we can get started with the Attack Navigator and put everything we learned into practice. So let's go ahead. I'm going to play a video which we're going to watch together, and we can circle back together in the conference right after it's done. All right, so we learned that there's tons of actionable data within the MITRE ATT&CK knowledge base, but sorting through literally mountains of information can be a difficult task, and it can be overwhelming. It's hard to find a good place to start when you're dealing with so much information. Fortunately, MITRE has created the MITRE ATT&CK Navigator, a tool for searching across the entire knowledge base and bringing together particular attack types and custom notations for your specific needs. You can use the Attack Navigator by pulling it directly from GitHub and running a local version, or you could go to the Attack Navigator hosted tool, which is available on the web. It's very easy to use. It doesn't require any kind of accounts being created or anything like that. You can just get started and use it right away. The Attack Navigator is designed to be simplistic and straightforward. It does provide some nifty cool features on top of what we can do with, say, Simply Excel. We can use it to visualize defensive coverage, plan red and blue team exercises, and do so much more. Let's start by creating a new layer by clicking Create New Layer. And I know you're probably wondering, what is a new layer? Layering is essentially the principal feature of the Navigator. And each layer essentially represents a custom view of the attack knowledge base that enables you to specify exactly what you need to see. Maybe you want to see specific techniques mapped to a particular adversary, or maybe you want to see how your mitigations are mapping to specific techniques or adversaries, etc. So we're going to dive right into this. And layers can be created interactively within the Navigator or generated programmatically and then visualized. So we'll take a look at kind of how to do both. And we'll choose the enterprise version. As you can see, we can go with the mobile or ICS matrices, but we'll go for the enterprise for this specific demo. Okay, so once we select a new layer, we are presented with this awesome view. And before we do anything, I just want to make sure that we're all very comfortable with what we're seeing here on the screen. Here at the top, we have all of the various tactics, and then each one of them has the various techniques as well as the sub-techniques, which can be expanded by these little controls here. And this works, I mean, this is pretty familiar view. It really depicts what we see in the matrices. So this shouldn't be a shocking view. It's very intuitive. Let's take a look at some of the controls, and then we'll look at a use case. If this is selected here, this little lock, we could select multiple techniques. We can select techniques across tactics. So see, if I select adversary in the middle, I can see that it is utilized within credential access and the collection tactics. But if I deselect it and I select only credential access, I won't be able to see it select across tactics. Now, if I select sub-techniques with parent, if I click on any techniques, it's going to actually select the sub-techniques with it automatically. If I deselect it, as you can see, sub-techniques are not being selected. So this is just a really cool kind of convenience control. The next one is the search, which enables us to search for things or select them manually from, we expand these lists here. So we can select multiple things at once, and again, we can just search here, or we can expand. If we're not sure what we're looking for, we can just expand, kind of look at the different threat groups. We can look at the different tools that are available and see what particular techniques are applicable to these. So there's also the mitigations options, and we're going to look at that in a little bit. But it's really flexible. So I'll go ahead and search for APT28. For today's use case, we're going to imagine that our organization is really worried about attacks from Russia. So we're going to take a look at what are some of the threats and the different techniques that are being utilized by APT28 and 29, and then see how our defenses are measuring against those threats. So let's go ahead and select APT28. And as you can see, some of the techniques did get a little bold kind of outline. So to make that a little bit more clear, I'm going to come here to technique controls, and I will select the background color. Let's go ahead and make that blue. And now, as you can see, it's very, very clear which of those techniques are actually applicable. And let's go ahead and close that pane and take a look at some of the other controls. Here, I can use the X to deselect all of them. I'm not going to do that, but this could be done virtually with anything that you select. The layer controls, first, we can select the layer information, and here's where we can change the layer name. I'm going to go ahead and select the APT28. I can give it a description if I wanted to. And as you can see, the other metadata is auto-populated. And you have the option to add some additional ones. We're not going to do that right now. This button enables you to download this layer as JSON and update it programmatically and then load it back to the attack navigator. So we're going to see how to do that next. This button enables you to export to Excel, super easy. Then you can do additional manipulation. And from this button, you can render the layer to SVG file, which is an image file. So I'm just actually going to click to show you, and we can also take a look at it later. But it does generate that really nifty and clean view that you could use to add to PowerPoints or have leadership conversations. This here is a filter, so I can actually go through here and kind of select what kind of platforms I'm more interested in. So you know, I can deselect or select certain platforms. For the purposes of the demo, let's go ahead and leave all of them on. So this is pretty self-explanatory, kind of enables us to sort things alphabetically. And then the color setup is really cool, but we'll get back to that in a little bit, just because I want to make sure that we cover something else first. We can show and hide disabled tactics, which is something that we're not going to do today. Expand sub-techniques. So if I click this, all the sub-techniques are actually going to be expanded on the things that I care about. So it's a little bit of a, you know, it's a little bit more detailed view, but it is helpful that you can do it within a click of a button. And then here I can collapse everything again. This button enables me to do some, you know, show IDs, show aggregated scores, etc. And now let's go ahead and take a look here. We already saw the background color, which we utilized. Let's look at this one. So you can actually apply scoring to each one of the selected items and have them be weighted. So let's go ahead and apply a score of 1 to these, and we'll see how we can use that score later. Here we can add comments, links, and any additional metadata. So this is good. Let's go ahead and create our second layer. Okay, so I've gone ahead and pre-configured some of the second layer because a lot of the steps were similar to what we saw, and I want to make sure we utilize the time effectively. So here I have named this layer APT29, and I have made selections to only display the techniques that apply to the APT29. One thing that I want us to do together is to actually come here to scoring, and go ahead and apply scoring of 2 for APT29. So remember, we scored APT28 with 1 and APT29 with 2. Before we move on to the next step, I just want to make sure that I show you something cool. So you don't have to necessarily come to the attack navigator. You can actually come to the attack matrix in the attack.mitre.org. And here, if you view techniques listed, for example, for APT29, what I just did, you can actually go ahead and open the attack navigator layers directly from here. Either download it or you can view them directly. And so that's going to load up that view, literally that same view that I was just showing you. This is just another way to get to it. So all of the APT29 techniques are selected automatically. So just something cool I wanted to make sure that I put out there. Let's go ahead and go back to our project. So remember, we are worried about attacks from Russia, and we want to see how do we measure against how do we measure against those specific threats. So we'll learn something new now. We're going to start a new tab, and then we're going to create a layer from other layers. So this is where the coolness comes, really. So here we are going to go ahead and choose our enterprise attack v12 domain, and as you can see up here, our layers got named A and B right here. So we're going to go A plus B, and we can choose everything else by default, and then click create. One thing I just want to caution you is that button is really hidden unless you hover over it. So make sure you remember that. So click create. So this is something cool. Remember earlier when I was going through the color setup, I said we'll go back to this one. Now's the time. So here we essentially are color coding things. If something is weighted with 1, it's going to be red. If something is weighted with 2, it's going to be yellow, and then with 3 is going to be green, because here our high value is 3, our low value is 1. So what we just did is essentially we were able to picture what techniques apply to both APT 28 and 29 and what applies to them individually. So if anything red applies only to APT 28, anything that is yellow would apply only to APT 29, and anything that's green actually applies to both. So this is the power of layering. It really enables you to kind of put different pictures together. So let's move on to the final step of this use case, where we're actually going to be mapping these to our mitigations. Okay, so I've just created a new layer, and before we do anything, let's go ahead and give it a name, because we want to make sure that as we create more and more layers, we don't get them mixed up. This is really good practice. So we created a name for this new layer, and now we're going to do something slightly different from what we've done before. We're going to pull up the search pane, but instead of using the search field, we're going to go scroll down to mitigations, and we are going to select the mitigations that we have implemented already for our organization. This will enable us to kind of see what parts of the overall matrix we have covered, and more importantly, we're going to use the layering approach to see what coverage do we have against the specific threats that we are concerned about as it pertains to Russia. So let's go ahead and select a few mitigations that we already know we have implemented. We have account use policies, we have Active Directory configuration, we are running antivirus and anti-malware in our environment. We also have food integrity, code signing, and let's just say we have the MFA. Okay, so we're going to stop here for the purposes of this demo. Obviously, this will be very different for each organization. And now let's go ahead and give a color. This would be green, and we'll close the pane. So you can see now that all of the mitigations that our organization currently has implemented are clearly denoted. And from the look of this, it looks like we have a lot of gaps, right? We don't have very good coverage across the MITRE matrix. But this doesn't necessarily mean anything yet, because we haven't done our layering against the specific threats that we are worried about. So this is the beauty of the layering approach. I'm going to come here and I'll give this a score of 4. And just a reminder, we already scored APT 28 and 29 layers with 1 and 2 respectively. So just wanted to make sure we remember that. Now we're going to go ahead and create a new tab. we're going to create a layer from other layers again. This time, we are going to layer the layer C, which is where we layered APT and 28 and 29. And we are also going to layer the mitigations on top of that. We're going to click create, and voila, look how interesting this is. Now, let me walk you through what we see here. Remember, we did the scoring. We are also utilizing the scoring gradient feature. And here we have scoring from 1 to 7. 1 being the lowest, that means APT 28 only without any mitigation. The score of 3 means we have both APT 28 and 29 without any mitigation. Score of 4 means that we simply have mitigation, but we're not really mitigating against the specific threats that we have. So we may have a mitigation, but we don't really know what we have, for the purposes of this simple exercise. And when we have 7, 6, or 7, that's when we actually know that we're mitigating 5, 6, or 7. That's when we know we're mitigating one or both of these APT type techniques. So take a look here. So we're worried about the 1s, right? We're worried about the 1s. We're worried about the 3s. All of the red and the orange are areas where we're vulnerable. We know that we are vulnerable. We don't have existing mitigations against the techniques utilized by these specific adversaries. Where we see 6s, where we see 5, where we see 7s, right? I know there's some 7s. That means that we have mitigations. So this is how easy it is for you to actually use the attack navigator to conduct a gap analysis between the specific threats pertaining to your organization and the mitigations that you have implemented. And I'm going to go back here to that view that we looked in the beginning, and this is rendering the image file. Look how awesome this is. This is so useful because you can actually use this to add to either slides or any kind of document to make a case why you may need to implement some additional controls, why you may need additional funding. So this is where the threat-informed defense is really powerful. And of course, these are really simple use cases that we kind of took a look at. You can get really a lot more adventurous with this, but I just wanted to make sure I cover some of the basic functionality and what you can do to get started with the attack navigator. Now, let's go back to see how we can load up and modify a layer programmatically. So we have our JSON file here open, and this just represents the exact same thing of what we saw with the graphical interface. This is just in JSON format, so we can see all of the different configuration settings. We have the domain, the description, we see the filters here, displaying all the different platforms. We see all of the layout settings. Here we can see all the different techniques and their specific configuration. So scroll all the way down, we can also see the gradient colors, the mix and match value, etc., etc. So let's go up here, and for the purposes of this demo, go ahead and apply a filter programmatically. So we are going to only look for Linux platform. Okay, so let's save that. And let's go ahead and add a new tab. And instead of creating a new layer, this time we're just going to open existing layer. It's as simple as that. We're going to upload from my local, and we'll select demo.json. And here we go. It loaded up. And if we look at the filters, we see that we applied only the Linux filter. Really, it's that easy And utilizing JSON files is really useful because it enables you not only to share this with other team members so they can load it up on their end, but you can also save your work and your different layers and mapping for future use, right? Because this is not a one-time exercise. And what we saw here, just to kind of summarize, was really the foundation of what you need to get started using the attack navigator. Now, of course, you can really, as I mentioned earlier, get very adventurous and advanced by using layers and kind of applying that to the specific needs of your organization. Okay, so that's all I had in mind to cover today. I hope that you found this demo useful, and I hope that you can use that and build on top of this knowledge to actually define the threat-informed defense mechanisms for your organization. Okay, we are back. I hope you found this demo useful, and I hope the video is coming through, you know, in a good quality. If not, please let me know. I'm happy to make this video available to anyone who is interested. Also, the EC Council will be posting this whole webinar on YouTube, so you'll have the chance to reference this video at any point of time later. I'm just gonna do this very, very brief. So already, you know, talked about the link here. Hopefully you guys heard me before I dropped. I was just sharing the link where you can find all of the resources that we discussed today. So just to summarize, essentially the key takeaways from today's talk is, first off, you need to know your organization, and this is how you know what threats applies to you and what you should be worried about. For example, if you're a financial institution, you'll definitely be worried about APT 38 out of South Korea, who are known to specialize in financial cyber operations, targeting banks, crypto exchanges, and other financial institutions. Once you identify your threats that apply to you, you need to get to know your threats. You need to know how do they operate, what are they after, what do they eat for breakfast. It's all about knowing your threats. Once you know your threats and what threat actors are in scope for your organization, you need to identify what are the gaps in your defenses, where are you vulnerable. And then finally, knowing how your threat actors operate and where your gaps are, this is the best way for you to tailor and prioritize your defenses cost effectively. And this is the crux of the so-called threat-informed defense, which was the goal of today's conversation. And finally, this is just a way for you to stay in touch with me as well as the EC Council. I know that we had a little technical glitch today, but please reach out to me personally, connect with me. I'm more than happy to have any conversations or follow-ups or answer any questions. And these are my social handles. I am still trying to figure out Mastodon. I'm just there because of FOMO, honestly. Not particularly know what I'm doing there yet. And today we learned a lot about the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Our conversation was on the threat-informed defense, but this is just a very small part of what is offered in the Certified Ethical Hacker certification. And so I'll pass it on to Richa so you can learn a little bit more about the Certified Ethical Hacker and how can it help you in your career and your journey.
Thank you, Eva. That was a wonderful session. It was a very interesting webinar, and I hope it was worth your time. I've already shared the video link of our product, which our webinar is in sync with. So you kindly request you to kindly save it and watch it later. Our product CEH, which is Certified Ethical Hacking, maps to many ethical hacking roles in the industry like security analyst, information security analyst, certified ethical hacker, security consultant, site administrator, network management executive. Anyone with CEH certification is eligible for 18,000 plus numbers of immediate job openings with an average salary of $90,000 to $11,000 per annum. If you're interested to know more, kindly take part in the poll which is going to be conducted now, and our concerned person will reach out to you. Now we'll take the questions. Eva, first question is how to prevent the cyber attack and how to prevent the cyber attack and how many modes of attacks are there?
So again, as I mentioned earlier, we really need to tailor our prevention to knowing our attackers. So there is really no one simple answer to how to prevent cyber attacks and how many modes are in a specific attack, because as you can see right from the talk, there are over 400, over nearly 200 techniques and over 400 sub-techniques, and this is not comprehensive. So I think really being well informed about your organization, the current socio-economical kind of macro events that are happening around your industry will enable you to know a little bit more about what is your organization's threats. And then from there, I'd really recommend you kind of applying those exercises that we saw today by defining, hey, these are some of the threats that I want to focus on preventing against, and mapping your defenses, like seeing what defenses you have in place and how do they measure against the specific threats that apply to you. So I know it's not the most perfect answer, but because the domain is so broad, there isn't really one way that you can just go and prevent attacks. Unfortunately, I wish there was.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you for answering that question. Moving on to the next question. This question is by Harsh. Being a SOC analyst, how should I effectively use the framework?
A SOC analyst?
Yes. Being a SOC analyst, how should I effectively use the framework? It's a question asked by Harsh.
For sure. So I think that you could, again, figure out what you as a SOC analyst, you know, what are the threats that apply to you. You know, you see the day-to-day threat feeds and attacks that are coming your way. I think you could use the attack matrix to kind of map out and figure out what you want to test your defenses against. So you can map your threat landscape through the attack matrix, and then from there you can test the readiness of your response and response capabilities against those specific threats. So it's essentially like using the attack matrix to more systematically map out what are, and you can even use your SOC data to figure out what are your threat actors, like what are these techniques that are being used against your organization to attribute them to greater APTs or campaigns, etc.
Thank you, Eva. Moving on to the next question. Is MITRE 100% free of charge? What is the difference between what you showed us and the one within Splunk and CrowdStrike?
I am not sure. So like there is, I think CrowdStrike and I know CrowdStrike utilizes MITRE, but there is no another MITRE framework. I am not sure. I don't think I understand the question.
We'll reach out to Yash for that. Moving on to the next question.
I'm happy, by the way, to follow up offline if you just give me some examples on what other matrices you're referring to, because I was not aware that there is another matrix. I know CrowdStrike utilizes the MITRE matrix, but there is no different matrix. So yeah, follow up with me offline.
Thank you, Eva. Moving on to the next question is by Yash. Does MITRE tell us about supply chain attack too? Like how to deal with them or how to handle them?
Yes, absolutely. I think there was actually a filter for supply chain. I can't remember off the top of my head, but supply chain has been a top priority for many of us. And there are some specific threat actors and groups out there that focus on supply chain attacks. So there is definitely emphasis. You can search for supply chain attacks directly, or you can filter out by APTs that are known to utilize supply chain attacks. But there is definitely resources for supply chain there.
Thank you, Eva. Moving on to the next question. This question is from Ashish. How is SecOps team choose which MITRE attack technique to implement for proactive monitoring?
Again, goes back to kind of what I was talking about earlier. First, you need to know your organization. This is super important because not all attacks and not all threat actors apply to all of us, right? We don't have an infinite amount of money. We don't have infinite amount of resources. So it's all about prioritizing, knowing your threats and being able to kind of map out the big picture first. And then from there, see how do you measure what are your defense mechanisms already in place? Do you have the right mechanisms based on your threats? And if not, where are your gaps? And then how do you prioritize those? I think focusing on the bigger picture is super important instead of going, I think in security operations, because I am also in security operations, it's very easy to get stuck in the day-to-day reactive mode because there's fires from everywhere all the time. But taking a step back and using the attack matrix to define the broader strategy for your SecOps team is really where you're going to be set up for success. And then you can also use that to make a case for more funding in specific areas where you think that defenses can be strengthened.
Thank you, Eva. Moving on to the next question. It's by Sazia. What are the most significant challenges for enterprises looking to use MITRE ATT&CK?
The most significant challenges. I mean, to be honest with you, it's a free tool. It's a free resource out there. So there's no really barrier for it to be used. I think the only challenge that I could think of is people not having enough awareness of all of the resources and all of the powerful kind of knowledge base beyond just the TTPs. I think that's the only challenge, just being aware of all of the resources, knowing how to use them. Once you start using them, it's, I think that the value is, the ROI is really high because it's very easy to make a case for it. Really, it does provide common language. It does bridge the gap between security teams and business stakeholders. So really, the only barrier that I can think of is just not enough awareness. It is completely free and it's widely adopted globally.
Thank you, Eva. We'll take a few more questions. This question is, how about threat on cloud technology? Is there any MITRE framework which can be used there?
The specific cloud-based threats, is that?
Yes, threat on cloud technology.
Threat on cloud. So we do, I mentioned we have the ATRM, which is the Azure Threat Research Matrix, which has specific TTPs for Azure, right? I think this is very Azure based. I think also in MITRE, there are various, so you can filter, there's a different platforms. So we saw in the hands-on demo, there's platform filter. So you can filter specific attacks that apply to various cloud technologies. So they They have stuff that apply to Google Workspace, to Office 365, specific SaaS type of attacks. They also have like containers, IaaS, and so forth. But I think that they're definitely still evolving those. So you may not find them very comprehensive.
Thank you, Eva, for that answer. Moving on to the next question. This question is by Ashish. Say, for example, a threat actor is identified as being responsible for a data breach. How easy is it to go back to MITRE ATT&CK and see exactly how they penetrated the network all the way to data exploration?
So I think that first you need to go, you need to use your own data, right? You need to do some threat hunting to identify the indicators of compromise and to map out the attack on your local use case. And then you can go and use MITRE to map out the different techniques or sub-techniques or procedures that were used and map those out to the tactics. So this would help you figure out what were the attackers' goals, what were they trying to accomplish. So just mapping, figuring how that applies in your own environment, and then mapping that out to the MITRE TTPs is how you would go about those. And this would also help you, figure out if that aligns to any specific ATP or any campaign. So that's the beauty of MITRE. It really helps you connect the dots. Instead of thinking tactically and reactively, you just are able to elevate your view on a more strategic way, so that you can plan more holistically for the future.
Thank you, Eva. We'll take two more questions. This question is by Neeraj. What is the difference between MITRE ATT&CK and Defender frameworks?
To be honest with you, I am not sure. I'm not sure. I have to follow up on this. So feel free to follow up with me offline. I'm not familiar with the Defender frameworks.
Thank you so much, Eva. The last question is how MITRE attacks take place and what is the best way to protect that? Is there any particular course for incomplete MITRE attacks?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. It has three questions together. One is how MITRE attacks takes place and what is the best way to protect that? And is there any course to complete MITRE attacks?
Is there any
course? Course.
Is there any what?
Course. C-O-U-R-S-E. Course.
Oh, course. Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh, thank you. So yeah, again, how the matrices are there, it's very complex, right? Attackers don't just go and open up MITRE and just go and follow like the steps. Usually the matrices are there to kind of help us map out attacker activity and make sense of it so we know what they're after and we know how to protect against it. So there is no one single way on how we can go protect against it. Is there any courses available? Absolutely, there are plenty. And one of them is actually the Certified Ethical Hacker certification. It does cover the MITRE attack framework. It does cover how we can use it, and it does actually teach us how to use, how to think of as an attacker and how to use a lot of these TTPs that are describing MITRE. So I think it's a really great certification. I personally really enjoyed the course. So definitely hoping that people can consider it.
Thank you so much, Eva. I would like to thank you again to our wonderful speaker for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge share to our global audience. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we're really looking forward for more and more sessions with you, Eva.
Thank you. Thank you. And please reach out to me offline for those of you that still have follow-up questions. I'd love to continue the discussion. So looking forward to, to stay connected.
That would be great. Before we conclude, Eva, this webinar, do you have any messages for our audiences?
I think the only message I have is definitely try to adopt a continuous learning mindset. We are in an ever evolving industry that literally what was in yesterday, it's no longer in today. So try to stay up to date with your learning, be curious, stay connected with the security community, and that's really what's going to set you up for success in the security industry. And network as much as you can, and that's how you learn new things, when you stay connected with other security professionals. That's all.
Thank you, Eva. That was knowledgeable.
Yeah, it was a pleasure for me to be here today, and looking forward to having more discussions with you guys offline.
Same here, same here. We would also like to thank all the attendees for attending this session and for being so patient. And before we conclude, I would also like to announce that our next session is scheduled tomorrow on how to become a network security engineer by Durgesh Kalia. And if you would like to register, you can register it on our website www.eccu.edu/cybertalks. The link is given in the chat section, and I hope to see you all tomorrow. On behalf of CyberTalks and our presenter, thank you again for joining us today, and have a great rest of the day. You all may can disconnect the line. Thank you so much, Eva. It was wonderful to have you with us. Thank you so much.